you are not leaving. Okay, so several specific questions I want to ask here, and I'm sure there will be better questions asked by the young people, young leaders participating in this afternoon sessions. That is, what exactly are the goals you are talking about following this morning's discussion? What exactly is the road and the path you would like to subscribe or suggest and explain them? What exactly were some of the lessons and experiences you learned through the exact context of your country's education and beyond? What do you think exactly how we can learn from those things happened in the past with our systems, with our teaching methods, and with our relationship with the students, and how we can do better today, and how it's not a goal, it's about specifics. So I want the specifics, ladies and gentlemen, in the afternoon if we can, and I'm honored to be joined by two panels in the afternoon. The first panel will be mainly business leaders, coupled up with a number of advisors as well, and our young leaders. And the second panel will mainly be about how can we figure out a roadmap to get to the goals where we desire. So I will announce all the names that will appear in the afternoon together, but I will direct specifically the names of people for the very first panel later. Okay, so we will have from business leader side, Daniel Charnavanot, who is from the CP group, sitting here. And also we have David Cruikshank, who's a former chairman of Deloitte. We have Jerry He, who's a vice president of a Bright School from China. We also have Daniel Lee, president of Fulcrum Investments from the US. And we have David Lee, vice chairman of global banking from JP Morgan. These are the business leaders. We'll also have young leaders coming from different parts of the world. They are Damien Bossalinger, who is coming from Germany, Origin Igiranes, I hope I pronounce your name right, coming from Rwanda. You can correct me when you're on the stage. And also Fan Jesse Young from China, Danny Bignell from the United States, and Maïta El Memari, who is coming from the United Arab Emirates. Meanwhile, we have contributors, Eric Shanushek, who is sitting here, who is from the Hoover Institute from Stanford University in the US. We also have Pam Grossman, the Dean of Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. So these are all the names that are going to appear in the afternoon, but for the very first panel, let's have onto the stage Daniel, Miss 我管从正大集团来的啊，我们的正大集团主席谢先生，And also we have David. Let's come up to the stage. Meanwhile, let's have the expert, Pam, shall we? Also, the young leaders, Maïta El Mamari and Dani, as well as Jesse and Duncan. Can we have all of them? Now, there is an issue of the seating. So all of you have an option to come up to the stage right now. I think we have enough seats for the first panel, right? It's really enough. I can just stand here. Please. Why don't we sit one young leader, one business leader? Is that okay? Can we do that? Would that be agreed? Okay. Can we change? Yes. 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 Oh, you're very kind. Thank you, David. Okay. Great. So we have all of them lined up. Now, my job is not to say too much. I've already said too much. My job is to be the bridge between a conversation happening among the two groups. So why don't we start from our young leaders? They have prepared brilliant questions yesterday already. So let's have the first lady to speak. What are the questions you want to ask, in a way? Follow up this morning's conversation, please.
Sure. So we've seen a lot of reports from the World Economic Forum, as well as the OECD, talking about the 21st century skills, the creative thinking, the critical thinking, and all these transferable skills that have become a buzzword in a lot of educational institutions, as well as businesses, when they're asking for what are the requirements of students who are graduating and entering the labor force. And so my question is, what skills will business need over the year? And I know these skills have been mentioned, but how are those skills developed, in your opinion? And are they developed before entering the business? Are they developed during the fresh graduates' years throughout the business? As well as, are these skills really transferable? Because we talk a lot about adaptability and the changing labor force. How accurate are these skills, representation and transferability, I guess, into these different fields?
Okay. Shall we have David to answer that question first of all? Sorry, this is the only conference I have to move my chair onto the stage, so I did exactly that. I missed maybe some of the part you said brilliantly, but David, go ahead.
David Cruikshank from Deloitte. We recruit about 90,000 people a year, and 45,000 of them we train through our various training programs, whether as consultants, actuaries, tax advisors, auditors, and a whole range of other professions as well. And I think I'd just say yes to your question. I think we look for students with strong academics, but they can come from just about any discipline. We look for people who've got strong analytical skills, numerical skills, skills with language, problem-solving skills, ability to work in teams, ability to express themselves orally and in written communication. And all of those are important, and I don't think any one can be a substitute for the other. And, we test for those when people come in to answer your question. We test at entry level whether people have sufficient of those skills. But I do think the skills are being developed all the time. I don't think we recruit people as finished products, either from school. We recruit from schools and from universities, because we do expect that part of our role is the development of those people and those skills, and so to suit the environment that we have. So we do a huge amount of training and development. But if we've got, we have to have the raw material to work with there, and I think that ability to think creatively, problem solve, express different points of view, challenge, is very, very important. The academics have to be there, but I think all the other bits have to be there as well. And I think they are transferable, because I can't think of any occupation now where those skills aren't required in some degree.
But Maitas, I wonder, really, are you trying to seek a job with David? Or actually, you're asking the question on behalf of your generation? I think your responsibility would be latter, right?
Yeah. From my limited experience with work placements is that you have these institutions that recruit high-caliber students for their creativity and for their talent and their innovation. Yet when they join their organizations, whether it be academic institutions, consulting companies, whatever organization it is, there tends to be a tendency within those organizations, even though they recruited those fresh graduates for their innovation and creativity and talent, to limit that talent and to retrain them, to repurpose them to kind of be a clog in the big machine. And so my question, I guess, is for everyone rather than just David, is how do we create more collaboration between business and education to continue harnessing that innovation and creativity? Because I feel like through my higher education journey, I had a really outgoing personality, and that was cultivated by the community that I was in. I was always encouraged to think outside the box, and you had the facilities in that limited higher education institution to actually execute those ideas. But then you join the labor force and you're limited by bureaucracy and by how things are always done the same way, and so we recruited you because you're talented, but you're supposed to fit the whatever is currently happening.
That's a very good challenge.
David, did you have the same trouble when you got out of the school?
I'll come back to that. Yeah, the challenge though of do we take people who are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, can conquer the world and solve all the problems, and then try and turn them into robots to make them do very routine tasks. There is a bit of that, I have to say. It's not being recorded too much, but there is a bit of that at the early stages. There are base professional skills that we require everybody to learn. There are, in many cases, professional exams that need to be passed. So there's a degree of standardization in that. But what we try and do is, as early as possible, open that up so that people can flower, that they can demonstrate all the skills they've got. And usually in an environment like ours, if you reach up, the opportunities are there, because everybody wants people to grow fast. And so if you reach up, you will nearly always find that somebody will give you a break. So just ask. You must. I demand. Don't ask. Demand.
Did you survive all of this also at the very beginning?
Yeah,
of your career?
I think back to my training. Some of it was a bit boring, and some of it was not that exciting. But there was always enough there that excited me, and I got to do enough interesting and challenging work to compensate for the bits that I didn't think was so interesting. But
what were the interesting? Because we don't want to talk about generally. We want to talk about specifically, because otherwise everything has been explored. All the right things have been said. But the thing is, we need case studies. We need real experiences. We need how you survive and thrive, and how the others could also do in a very different circumstances. If I could, my job is to push. Michael told me.
I shouldn't hog the microphone for too long.
Yes,
but
right.
I think
and then we'll move on to the others.
Doing things that other people hadn't done, being first. To create solutions to problems. I've always loved dealing with very complex problems. So to find answers that other people hadn't been able to find, to design processes, design ways of doing things that were better, and to see in the end the output from us is to help clients succeed where they can be better than their competitors. So it's always to try and find ways of being out in front and being creative and innovative around the approaches that we took to dealing with problems or doing work for clients. That was the bit that turned me on. That's why I stayed with Deloitte for a long time, just about 40 years. So.
Matthias, I'm not sure whether you are satisfied with that. If not, we'll come back to David later, okay? Danny, let me play the game the other way around, so we'll get Pam really to say something about specific issues and specific case studies. Can we know, first of all, of Pam maybe, what kind of aspirations did she have when she got out of university? And what kinds of values did she desire at the very beginning of her career? And whether those have eventually realized or not? So that then we can invite your questions, based on what her experience are, okay? Can we do that, Pam?
Sure.
We have to be specific.
So I went to university to become a high school English teacher. That was my goal. I went to an excellent liberal arts college, so I developed a lot of the written communication, a lot of the skills that you mentioned. And along with the bachelor's in English, I also got a teaching credential and taught for 8 years in high school. And I would say that everything I learned as a teacher has been enormously useful in my role now as an academic leader. I often say that I draw most on my experience as a teacher in my new role as a dean. I didn't set out to become a dean. I really loved teaching, have always loved teaching, loved being a professor, loved doing research. But like you, I enjoy solving problems. I enjoy thinking organizationally. I enjoy supporting the learning of others. And so becoming a dean of a college has been enormously satisfying. But when I think about the work that I do, so much of it draws back on my experience as a teacher, the ability to explain, the ability to create bridges between what somebody understands and where I'm trying to get people. the designing a faculty meeting is a little bit like designing a lesson plan, right? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to get there? So I feel like a lot of the experiences I've had have really drawn on that. What's interesting in higher education, and I'd be curious about other people's responses to this, is that we require higher education for virtually every profession, except for higher education. So I became a dean without a degree in leadership in higher education or certification in that. And so much of it you're learning along the way. Much of it you're drawing on experience, learning from others. So it is very much experiential learning rather than formal preparation.
Yes, thank you so much. It's definitely an honor to be sitting next to you since I am an alumni of the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And I love that you touched on experiential learning. So in the introductory remarks, it was really enlightening to see growth mindset on this slide many, many different times. And I am a product of an interdisciplinary master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in the Graduate School of Education that really allowed me to build skills that I am using on this stage right now. Complex problem-solving skills, public speaking skills, using actually community-based programs to interact with leaders in education, in the nonprofit world, in business, so that I was being set up for success in school so that I could succeed in the workforce afterwards. However, from working with different educational institutions, I've seen that the institution of education itself is actually a fixed mindset. And there are exceptions to that rule. So I ask you, what recommendations do you have for other institutions to allow for more of a growth mindset, to allow cooperation, more cooperation with businesses for the benefit of the future workforce?
Danny, just a footnote before we go to Pam for the answer. You might want to share with our audience as to what you are doing right now, because that's in a way related to your question.
Yes, absolutely. So I am a lifelong learner, and I actually run a social impact incubator that's based out of UC Berkeley. And what we do is we equip both undergraduate and graduate students with funding, mentorship, and skills-based development so that they can take the ideas that they've learned in their classroom and scale them in the real world. And I developed that training through my education at Penn. So it is an incredible honor and privilege that I am allowed to take that training I learned at Penn and then translate it at UC Berkeley. And the interesting caveat about the program at UC Berkeley is that you are allowed to create teams where only one individual has to be a student, because we believe intrinsically that diverse perspectives create the most sustainable, successful solutions.
Okay, besides this beautiful Penn alumni reunion, let's answer the question. Go ahead with the question. The institution not work very well, especially educational institution. That's from Danny.
So I'm so glad that you highlighted some of the strengths of the International Education Development Program at Penn, because I think it is a good model, along with a master's in educational entrepreneurship, of what education can be. So both of those two master's programs include a lot of experiential learning that's coupled with the more academic learning. So in the case of the program you graduated for, there's a several months long internship where people are placed globally. So people could be working anywhere around the world, using the skills they had developed in the classroom, learning new skills along the way, and then bringing that learning back to the classroom in the fall. The educational entrepreneurship model is designed to actually prepare people for incubators like yours, to really support both educators and business people to think of new solutions through entrepreneurship.
May I just come in here, because we love a business, how should I say, we love education institution in University of Pennsylvania, but we are talking about a much bigger issue than just the educational institution there, but rather globally.
So the example, you wanted specifics though. So the specifics are that these programs are designed to do something that many programs are not, which is to marry experiential learning with academic learning, to not say it's either or, to not say you learn everything by going out and starting a business yourself, but that you can marry that learning from a wide variety of perspectives. And I think often in higher ed, we think of most of the learning happening within the classroom, within course units, within credits, and aren't thinking hard enough about how to marry that with the actual skills that people need to develop to be successful in those arenas. So models that do more of that blending, I think, are often more successful in preparing people for the workplace.
Let's go to the other one. Yeah. I want to share an example of mine so that we can really start the real conversation. Sometimes the host has to make a comedian of herself in order to do that. I graduated from a no one knows university in China. But on my memories of my university days, I shared over the lunch table with our friends, is several things. Now, I started a rock and roll music radio on campus. At that time in China, rock and roll was still not that much accessible. But anyway. Secondly, there was the fourth women's conference being held in China at that time. The very first time, women from all over the world come to my country. And for me, it was an eye-opening experience to interact with so many people from so many different cultures. Thirdly, for 1.5 years, I have an American roommate. I remember her name, Miss Katie Saldarini, coming from South Carolina. And we were roommates, and she shared with me all the wonderful life and experiences she had, and of course mine with her. And she taught me about the dating skills as well, but it didn't work in China context, I can tell you. And the last thing I remember is there is a big library in my university, despite of the fact it is not well known. And the president of my university used to be working at the United Nations. In other words, he taught me a lot about stories from the other world, in a way, quote unquote. So that's the 4 things I remember from my university days. And I think, in a way, it probably going to the root of the kinds of discussion we have about education and the workplace. I love my teachers. They were great to me. They were very experienced, very kind, but I don't remember very well what they taught me. But no offense, I love them utmost. But here is the thing that we are talking about education. And I am a passionate, long-retired university student. But I think the topic is evergreen with us, particularly right now. So why don't I give the microphone to the real young leader sitting here and ask him to ask the real question to Mr. Cheravannath. Because Mr. Cheravannath is a very open-minded person. I know that from my childhood. So go ahead and ask the question.
Yes, so continue with Ms. Tian Wei's case, her story. Actually, I'm pretty different from Ms. Tian Wei. Actually, I came from Cornell University. I just graduated the past summer. Cornell is one of the Ivy League schools in America. It's pretty well known. And back to China, I was in the Beijing No. 4 High School, which is also one of the top high school in China. But I think I did learn a lot from my teachers from these schools. I'm not a generic good student in China because I'm not doing that well in the classroom or on the examinations, but I'm very active in all of these student activities, extracurricular activities. I was the student union president when I was in high school, and I was the president of Chinese Student Association in Cornell. But what I think the universities or my high school aren't doing well is that I do a lot out of school for the social activities, but I still think I'm not prepared to start my career. I have no good vocational education when I was in college or in high school. So I just heard about Mr. Cruikshank said Deloitte is spending a lot of money to train their employees to be suitable for the works of Deloitte. But I think, is that the job of universities? Why companies are spending their money? Because I know Mr. Chiravanant has more than 200,000 of employees in your company. Is that a problem you are facing about universities are not providing good vocational education for students, and companies needs to do universities' work to train students to be ready for jobs and the society?
Mr. Chiravanant, you have the microphone. Please.
我对这一方面应该向各位学习，但是我们集团在做的事情呢，就是靠大学毕业生，但是还是又在培训。我们的培训方法就是用实际去工作，实际从实战中呢得到经验。我们培训的人才什么呢？是领导人才。我们是不培训一般的员工，因为下去一般的员工已经没有了，全部是机器人代替了，软件代替了。下去的我们集团的员工是每一位都可以打仗，每一位都可以替集团赚钱、发展、创新。所以我们除了他大学毕业以外，我们在培训呢，在6个月就见效了，在6个月他就可以当经理了，最慢1年也可以当经理。就是我们用实际的，就是去做，去实际去行动。我们把亏本的企业交给他们一个团队，那么指点他，不指导他，由他们自己去做。他们做错没有关系，你今天做错，你们明天改。所以又有他们有成绩，又得到这个进步的话呢，他一定要给他有这个失败的经验。我们不怕他失败，只怕他失败了不了解。他今天失败做错了，他们明天改。所以我感觉到我们这个培训用实体，我们是实体经济，在培训他。我们的事业呢有生产，有这个世界贸易，又有这个零售业，我们有电信业。所以我们的做法呢，就是把亏本的事业，把亏本的一些小的事业呢，交给他们，在半年就可以赚钱了。这是我这样讲，是因为我们新的事业呢是用新的人，用新的事业，不要用老的人。老的人你可能要洗他头脑，又给他讲清楚，说你以前做的不对，但是他做得很好，也会赚钱。但是今天的社会呢，不是你今天做得很好，你明天还是很好，不是。明天可能是颠覆性的，你可能大公司明天会倒闭。如果你不改革的话呢，不创新的话呢，你会倒闭。因为这个时代，这个世界的这个高科技发展得很快，你一不小心，特别是大企业，都在停留在它以往赚钱，就忽略了去创新、去改革、去改变。所以我们这个做法呢，得到很成功，就是用新的人做新的事情，但是这个新的事情是跟我们老的事业关系。所以我们把老的事业一部分交给这些年轻人去执行，他们当老板，我们叫他当老板，不叫他当员工。每一个人都要懂得财务、生产、物流、销售、服务，就是全能。结果呢，效益很好。到最后，他们这个团队都会知道谁是领导，由他们自己去体会到谁是领导，谁是哪一方面做得很好，他们自己就会组成一个新的公司， 会发展，因为我们集团往往都在几十年前就做这个新的事业，开始都是没有几个人，到最后就是1万个、几万个人、10几万人，我们集团用了30几万人。现在我们整个在改革，怎么样改革呢？就是不要去把老的体制毁灭掉，先推翻，就是用新的人才去做新的事情，但是用老的事业给他们去创新，所以以后呢影响我们老的事业，给他们学到。你现在就他做了说他不好，他赚钱，
Right.
你说不好吗？但是我们这个年轻人一做了赚钱比他还好，这样来改革我们集团的这个整个变法。
You talk about three things, it seems. One is to learn from failure, the capabilities. Secondly, is to have a holistic approach of kind of talents that you can churn out from university or educational systems. Thirdly, you are talking about a parallel system going on within your business on how to nurture the young employees' failure and learn from failure. Do you think, though, you have learned about that in university? If not, what can we connect the two worlds?
Yes, I think Mr. Charavanath's company provides a really good training program or education program for the young employees to make them be capable of being leaders and embrace the technological changes in the modern society. But I think the universities or college are still lack of these kinds of vocational fostering or education. And that's why I think we're holding this forum to let the business leaders connect with the educational leaders. And probably the most viable solution is universities can work with companies probably to have a new system of helping students adapt to the society and adapt their career. Because I just work out college. I am struggling with knowing everything in China because I study in America. I know basically nothing about American professional world, and I know absolutely nothing about Chinese professional world. I think if there is a system connecting business sectors, private sectors with the educational sectors, it sounds very attractive to me because I really need it right now.
Can you answer that? Can you answer that?
I think that we are in a world now where there aren't sharp divides between the world of education and the world of business. And I think people are going to be re-educate themselves many, many times over their careers for different options. I give you an example. My firm Deloitte does a millennial survey every year of employees of all companies from around the world. It's a big survey, about 14,000 people, and we've been doing it for about 10 years. So it's quite interesting looking at the trends in there. But this past year, we asked the question about the fourth industrial revolution. And we asked millennials, what do you think the fourth industrial revolution means for your jobs? Half of them said, no problem at all, great, because it's going to enhance our jobs. We can do our jobs better because of it. 25% thought it didn't make any difference. I'm not sure who they were, but that was the response. And the remaining 25% said they were worried because they thought that there was a risk that some of their jobs could be automated and they could find themselves out of work. However, and the most interesting bit to overlay on that is 70% of that whole population said they didn't think that their skills in digital would be enough to see them through the next 5, 10, 15 years. They need more training, more skilling, and so on. So I think we're in a world now where the skills that people require, the education they require is going to change and develop all the time. And I think some of the challenges for universities and colleges and even schools is, how do you make that process more continuous? How do employers engage with educational institutions to make it a more continuous process? Because it's, when I started, I think most people thought, well, you went to university once at the beginning of your career and that was it. I think we're going to be moving into a very, very different, we've already moved into a very different world from that. And I think how do we make it more continuous and get more of that engagement?
What David said to me is kind of worrisome in a way, that businesses have realized, well, the educational institutions, they don't turn out the right talent. We have to do it ourselves. It seems that you're trying to say exactly that. And also, I think Mr. Cheravanant also suggested that in a way, in a very polite way, of course. So what is the lack of the connection between the two worlds? Pam, I want to come back to you. Don't praise the education institution of Pennsylvania University again. Tell us, what are the problems? As an educator, do you have a roadmap? Do you have a roadmap?
I think this question of the relationship between universities and jobs is a very complicated one, and I agree with David that this is evolving and changing. I think the notion of universities preparing people very specifically for vocations is problematic because the jobs are going to change, as we just heard. Jobs are going to continually evolve. Most of you will have many jobs requiring different skills. So I think the focus on some of these skills that we talked about earlier that are transferable around communication, around collaboration, around the ability to learn, complex solving problem, are some of the skills that you can develop in universities that are transferable across a range of job possibilities, but also support the continuation of learning, which I think is going to be a reality for most of us in terms of what the future looks like. We're constantly going to be learning new things. So I think creating both K-12 schooling and university schoolings that are adapted to those skills and assessing those skills, holding universities and schools accountable for teaching those things will be part of the solution. The other part is that increasingly corporations are doing some of their own, creating their own learning and training institutes, substituting for universities where they feel like it hasn't been, they haven't developed those skills. So I think universities are going to feel that pressure.
You know, I just want to have a brief observation before David speak. Yeah. When you were speaking, the other students were going like, the other two business leaders were. So their facial expression does say something. So let's have David to respond to that from the business leaders to the educators.
Yeah, and I really don't think it's an either-or thing. I do think that universities and colleges are a very special environment for people to develop their thinking, work out where their weaknesses are, their strengths are, learn to work with other people, learn to work across discipline, test themselves, fail sometimes. I think they have a very special place. So I don't see businesses substituting for the universities, but what I do see is some of the learnings of both being exchanged and it being a more continuous process, if you like, throughout all our lifetimes. Because as I said, I think it's continuous learning and development is something everybody's going to have to get used to. And there's many examples actually around the world where people have been taken back from the working mums. I think in Korea there's a wonderful example actually, a whole bunch of them taken back, no digital skills at all, and they were taught to be computer programmers, a whole group of them, I think age about 55, and they all went on to work in the workplace, and that was an example of a business, university, college collaboration. And so I think we have to experiment a lot more, because the pace of change is huge, and just pretending that old models were good for us won't work.
Thank you. Mr. Cheravanant, and then we'll have the young leaders to speak up. 谢先生也请您说两句。
我看大学应该是跟一个企业一样，比如我们有生产什么产品，我们要先了解全世界这个产品是不是受欢迎，是不是全世界所有这种产品一样，大学也是一样，要制定培养学生应该了解，培养企业家人，所有企业家所有的人才应该问企业家，你们所有什么教他什么学问，出来就我们不用再培训了，在他念大学的时期呢，也可以跟我们半工半读。一出来一毕业呢，我们也不需要再培养他6个月、1年，他出来就马上可以上任。这样的话呢，对两方面都好。所以呢，我希望大学呢，我有一个建议，大学应该要先了解社会今天所有什么人才，那么你才针对这些所有呢来制定教材。 所以这个教材呢，还是不是永久不变的？因为这个社会这4.0时代呢，天天在变化。你这个教材如果老化以后，你培养出来的学生已经过了时代了，所以是不适合于大企业家所有的。连这下去的这个创业者呢，马云主席他讲，未来呢，企业家是剩千万，算一，不是垄断在这个大公司里面。因为有了互联网，他可以把他的产品呢销售，经过这互联网销售到全世界去。所以大学应该来了解一下，那未来工作人员会越来越少，为什么全部用智能、用软件代替人工？连工人下去都没有，用机器人代替，连农民也没有了，就是用机械代替农民。所以下去的人应该做什么？什么是他们就业机会的最好？那大学就要教这些人才出来可以用。
Pam, you want to briefly respond to Mr. Cherawannath just said? I'm not saying you are here representing all the universities, but rather as an educator, how do you see, how can we really connect the dots? Can we do it better this time? Briefly, please, and then I go to the young leaders.
Well, I'll be curious to hear what the young leaders have to say about this. I certainly think you're right that universities need to be responsive. They need to understand what it is that both businesses are looking for, but also what young people are looking for.
But I tend to agree. The hard thing is how.
But I tend to agree, though, that universities are not the same as businesses. Ultimately, they have a special function in terms of education that is a broader function around education than training functions of a company. So I don't see them as being exactly the same. I think the trick is how do they communicate and collaborate more effectively.
Well said. Thank you. Now let's go to the young people, quote unquote. I want to be part of you, but you know, we will have you to speak about your mind. Before you start, Danny, let me say that recently people have been helping me to see the next generation, quote unquote, so different from the earlier generations in the fact that the current generation sitting with us on the stage, the three of them, are living in a world in which they see both physical world and the virtual world from the very early age of their life. None of us did that when we were very young. So the way they think and the way they look at things, the way they absorb and learn could be quite different from our path too. Now, the question really is, now, then I want to speak about this. What would be the suggestions that you have for us about the values and the skills and the way of doing things when it comes to education, given the uniqueness of your generation, if I could?
It's a very good question.
A good question. I'll have the three of you all to say something.
And thank you for thinking that I am very, very young, but I actually am a little older, where I did have a part of my life up until high school where I didn't have an internet connection in my house. And when I went to university, I like to call the millennial generation the in limbo generation, because you have digital immigrants, older individuals that have learned later on in their life how to adopt technological practices, and then you have digital natives, so people that were born after me that always had technology as an integral part of their life. And I see technology as both a tool and a crutch. I think that we can rely on older leaders to help us better understand how technology can be used, but how we can fall on best practices of before. But I also think we need to teach young leaders through education how to not be so dependent on technology. What I saw in the PISA results is that although, and speaking as an American, although Americans are having higher performance, they are citing that they are not feeling that good about themselves. Burnout, overexposure to technology, I think, is making them feel more isolated. So taking specific steps to take what I call a digital detox, having particular conversations in classrooms where you are forced to look people in the eye when you talk to them and to listen to them actively, I think is imperative for the future, because if we do not learn how to communicate with humans, then I believe we are basically approaching doom. So as technology advances and as we are building robots and AI to take over, let us remind ourselves that we are building these robots. So we have the power to change them and make them work. And humans are always going to be involved. And so I'm curious to hear from both the young leaders and the business leaders, what particular tools and actions would you take now to make sure that that symbiotic relationship with technology in the future is more sustainable?
Great question, and certainly great perspective too. Maita, please speak out about this too.
Sure. Before I started that, I think there are two things that I feel like are missing in our conversation. One was brought up by Dean Pam, which is, what is the purpose of education? Is the sole purpose of higher education to prepare students to join the labor market, or is it a self-exploration opportunity? Is it an opportunity to learn civic engagement? What is the purpose of higher education? And I think that takes many forms, and there is not one
What's
purpose.
your answer? Because we want to hear what your voice is.
Well, I had a liberal arts education, and I really enjoyed that. I think it was a self-exploring purpose, and that opportunity allowed me to really explore what fields does Matha like, what global problems does Matha want to solve. And I think that type of education is the type of education that helps students stay engaged, rather than burn out and kind of feel like overflow of information, studying philosophy, technology, whatever it is. You're learning about something with the purpose of contributing. And that contribution doesn't necessarily mean employment, but it can also mean kind of what Jesse talked about, this informal education through student activities and social activities. And that's my second point. I think we haven't discussed how informal education actually helps build these critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and they're just as important as formal education. And to answer your question of like, how do we create the solution, or my suggestion, I guess, is you start really early on. I feel like in my higher education experience, I had a lot of collaborative experiences where I worked with organizations, and I was having kind of the academic and the theory being taught in my higher education. But I wished I did that earlier, like in my high school, or when I was starting to form these interests and these skills, because my high school was very narrow. You had to pass the SATs, you had the national examinations, and then I went to higher education, and I didn't feel like I even had the skill set to be able to excel in that environment. And I think there needs to be a broader conversation of how we can create collaboration between the K-12 higher education, if necessary, as well as incorporating vocational education, looking at other education forms and not necessarily just the teacher-classroom collaboration. And my last point is, I think we live in a globalized world, and that's one thing that I also kind of missed in this discussion, is there's a global economy that we're working with. And that's, I think you pointed at it as well, as the biggest difference is that growing up in this generation, I think, is you feel a sense of interconnectedness, even if you're not physically next to each other. You feel a sense of responsibility and awareness, and you have an impact beyond the borders of your nation or your state or your community. You have the opportunity to have global impact through this technology that we use as a tool. And so how can we incorporate that into our education systems as well?
Brilliant point. Please go ahead,
Yes, speaking of my generation, I was born in 1997 in China. So I was born with internet. The economy is good in China since my childhood. Technology are accessible from my childhood. We are actually...
in the big cities.
Yes, Beijing. It's absolutely
but
big
not in
city.
the rural areas.
Yes. So actually, I am born with a combination of virtual world and the reality. So I think virtual world technologies are like opportunities for us, but also like traps for us. For my generation, in our education, we didn't give that much value on literature, on history, or humanities studies as before. I know my parents or my cousins, they don't have that good access to technologies, but they give more time on reading histories, reading classics, but not my generation. My best friend since childhood is Game Boy, and then iPhone 4, and then iPhone 5, and then now it's Huawei. So we are not that close to literature or humanity. I remember what Jack Ma said today morning is that in the future it will be an era of coexistence of machine and human, and human needs to distinct themselves from machines. And I think what can distinguish them is our humanity, our compassion, our understanding of past, of history, of classics, and those are the brightest spots of human being, I think. I think that's why I believe technologies can be a trap for human being. For my generation, is that it is taking away our time to spending with our families, to knowing each other, to working out of our comfort zone, to know more about who we are. I think that's my opinions on my generation.
Yeah, but as we know, technologies are neutral. So it really depends on how we take advantage of the technologies and in what way. So in that regard, let's come back to our topic, which is not about technology, but rather about education. And as to how would you link the latest with the technologies and the impact it had on you together with the kind of future of education we want. So any specific suggestion in that regard, Jesse, before we move on to the other speakers?
Yes, you mean any specific suggestions for...
For what you have just said, outline
Yes.
the problems.
Yes, actually, I just know about the problems. I don't have a viable solution suggested for the topic. But from my perspective, I think in order to combat with machines, first we need to embrace the technology change. We need to understand the cutting edge technologies, the cutting edge sciences. I know the tax trend report for Deloitte in the year 2017, the title is The Kinetic Enterprises. So enterprises are being kinetic to adopt the era. I think maybe talents needs to also understand the changes of technology. And I think that's the first step. And the second step is, I think we need to connect more with other nations, other cultures. We need to break the boundaries of subjects, of cultures. And I think that's why we're having this forum right now. We have Chinese representatives, we have Europe representatives, we have people from US colleges. We are wearing this translator to understand each other, go beyond the language. I think that's a good start for me. Probably the solution I suggested is, the first step is more conference like that.
Okay, we hope. I think we hope. Okay, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to add to that.
See, if you ask the young people to speak up, they're really going to speak up.
Well,
So
with climate
after
change,
another round, we go to the others to respond to you, okay?
I would say that international education has been incredibly valuable for me. And what I was talking with the young leaders before is that even though I've had very interesting, unique educational experiences that were offered through the public education system that allowed me to grow and have a growth mindset, I also learned so much from the countries that I had the privilege of working and learning in. And what I think is very important to note is that no one country has all of the solutions for business and all of the solutions for education. In China, I see many practices that I'm envious of because of the rigor, and yet I also see the breadth of education that we really apply in the United States to be very advantageous. And so I feel like the best combination is when you can have experiences from many different cultures and different worlds. And so having the future of education and this Forum for World Education is one step in the right direction, but my concern is that the conversation stops here. So what I ask business leaders and education leaders is, what concrete steps can we take today to make sure that education and business truly has no borders? Because also in light of climate change, I feel like we have to take down those physical borders that we have in order to unite for our survival. And
We shouldn't let it just remain in rhetorics,
Exactly.
but in actions and real achievements. David, you want to come back on this?
Just a couple of points. Actually, first one, I was just listening to the discussion about AI and robotics and machine learning and so on. And of course, humans teach the machines. Humans program the algorithms, and humans provide the incentives for what the algorithms should achieve. And clearly, if the algorithms are designed to achieve bad outcomes, guess what? The robots will achieve bad outcomes. So I think humans have more oversight, input into the control of what goes on with machine learning and robotics than maybe we think sometimes. If I just move outside the world of Deloitte, just a couple of reference points to the links between school and business. 2 years ago, the World Economic Forum did a huge survey actually around the world, and they looked at the future of jobs, and they estimated that 65% of children entering primary school 2 years ago would go into jobs that didn't exist today. Now, if that number's 60%, 55%, it doesn't really matter, but it's a huge number. And so I think one of the things I said outside Deloitte, I chair the trustees of a small charity in the UK that spends its entire time getting people from the world of work into the world of schools to improve the dialogue, if you like, and to open the eyes of school students and sometimes teachers as to the way the world of work is changing. And indeed, some of the teachers use some of the learnings from those talks, not to train their students for the world of work, because I agree that's not the purpose of education, but it's to inform the students about why some of the things they're learning could be important, depending on choices that they made later on in their life. And I think there is, with the pace of change that's going on in the world at the moment, which is certainly in my career, I've never seen the pace being faster. The pace of change that's going on, nobody has all the answers, and I agree with all the comments about, we share all these problems around the world, because I think there's no boundaries around some of these challenges. But I think the more physical connections of getting humans into schools from the world of work, particularly in the newer industries and so on, to talk about what they do, I think it opens the eyes of students and also teachers to some of the possibilities, and I think it enriches some of the educational outputs that come.
Mr. Taravanot, would you like to also provide your input?
我认为这个学校很重要，学校培养人才来制造机器人 AI 来软件，到最后还是有人来用。刚才那位先生讲的，那么所以学校呢，应该是同时也有给学生知道怎么样用好这个高科技作为一个工具。这个工具呢，在企业也可以用，到什么事业都可以用，在教育方面也可以用。比如这个养成教育，将来一个老师可以教几十万人、几百万人，因为是可以经过这个互联网，就不是教在这个小客厅里面或者小房间里面去教几十个人，所以我说未来这个教育呢还是很重要。我是建议这个教育也有不断的更新，要跟着时代的这个变化、高科技的变化，而要领先高科技，而不是追在高科技的后面。高科技一定是生存，是人类跟高科技共存。生产还有使用它，这对这个未来的世界呢，这个变化跟使到人类更幸福，都是还是人跟高科技，到最后还是人去使用。所以学校应该是培养创造的人，而又培养使用的人。比如我们企业家，我用来的我是实体经济。我用了高科技来改革我这个实体经济，跟虚拟经济结合，所以我们的事业会进步得很快，产量也会大大的提升，品质提升，价钱便宜，一到最后，你的产品是为了人类，
Yes.
为了大众，是。
Thank you, Mr. Taravanot. Pam, it seems that this gentleman is trying to suggest if you don't update the educational system yourself, you're going to lose your job in the future. because the kids going to run away from schools and they can learn it somewhere else. Respond to that before we wrap it up.
Well, I think technology, as you say, is a part of our lives, and it's a part of education, and increasingly we'll use it as a tool, as an additional tool. We heard a lot about personalized learning this morning. I think one of the questions is, to what extent do we have the research that supports that kind of differentiation? So one plug I'll put in is for more educational research on some of these innovations and the ways we use technology. We heard calls for more experimentation, and coupled with the experimentation should be more rigorous research to find out what works and for whom and under what conditions. Because I think technology is a part of life. I think we're going to be using it more and more in everything we do, and learning more about how it can be effective in supporting learning. There's lots of online learning, but we also know that not everybody learns well that way. So how do we, again, learn from the vast kind of experimentation that's going on right now in terms of the use of technology to improve the quality of learning?
Okay. We started a bit late for this session, so we wrap it up a little bit later than earlier planned. But before we go, I want to have every one of you, not a whole paragraph, not a whole sentence even, just one key word that you think would be important for all of us to ponder upon after this discussion. David, since I started with you at the very start, why don't I do that at the very end also?
I firmly believe in collaboration between schools, employers, educators, and businesses, and creating better understandings, not to confuse the boundaries between the two, because as I said earlier, they have different roles. But I think there's a richness that can come out of that collaboration, which I would like to see, and I think our younger speakers have talked very eloquently about that this afternoon.
Collaboration. Next.
Building on that, I guess, collaboration with an aspect of diversity and a global lens.
Okay. Pam?
I think there's a consensus here. I would also say more communication and collaboration across these boundaries, both between institutions and across nations.
CNC, communication, collaboration.
I hate to say collaboration again, but using strengths-based leadership so allowing education to do what they're best, and then allowing businesses to do what they're best, and working together to really create sustainable solutions.
谢先生。
我建议是世界人类命运共同体，我们的学校、企业家也好，技术界也好，都要为世界人类命运共同体而奋斗。
谢谢 Thank you.
I would say the world kinetic. We need to keep changing with the world. School needs to keep changing. Also, they always need to listen the suggestions of the companies. I think that's why we need to be kinetic. That's it.
Okay, since we have the young leaders pretty much as the main leading roles on the stage, I want to get them some scores of the adults, quote unquote, you are talking to. Can they pass the test or they fail the test, at least for this discussion? Would you say pass, then you raise your hand. Did they pass the test?
Weren't we taught that we shouldn't be using exams to
Oh,
check
yes, you got me
people's
there.
competencies?
Yes, exactly. I think it's a great idea. Now you guys survived, shall I say. Okay, let's bring a warm round of applause for all the people on the stage. Thank you so much. Good. Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yes. Thank you. I want to follow up with the second panel. We've already set some quite fired up stage for all of you. 谢谢, 谢谢. Watch out. Yeah. And should we have all of the members of the second panel to come up to the stage? We will have Daniel, Jerry, and we also have Eric. Meanwhile, Danny, once again, and Damien, as well as Jesse, I think that is the one that I got here. Yes, please. Let's one young leader and one business leader and opinion leaders. Yes, you're back again. I think it's also your name here. Okay. I was told that the second panel will be even more exciting. No offense to the first panel, by the way. So people don't go away. Now, let's go to the second panel. Let's meet the young people first. Can we do that? Because there are one new player here, right? The other two have already spoken. Let's go with you first. Who you are, what you do, why you are here, what's important.
Okay, so my name is Damien Böselager. I was working in the private sector, so I can connect to the business world, I guess. And then in 2016, I saw that we had a rise of right-wing populism across Europe, and that we also had a bit of an unfortunate election, at least from my perspective, in the United States, where I was studying at that time. And that made me and two fellow Europeans, an Italian man and a French woman, think that maybe it's time to build a European party that counters the more nationalistic focus with a European perspective. And so we did that, and then we ran for the European Parliament elections out of 8 countries, and we won 1 seat, which is the one I am sitting on in the European Parliament. And my connection to education is that I have many thoughts about them which are very naive, which I will be happy to share with you, but I am not an expert in the field. I think the only real conviction I have is to go back to school when I'm 50 or 55 to give back to young students with what I learned until then.
We were told, quote unquote, this morning by a lot of the speakers that there's nothing like naivete, which you mentioned. So we are willing to hear your input here. Okay? Thank you. As long as you have 1 seat, it's already very important for the vote. Let's go with Mr. Li. I want you to have a response to the earlier discussion, and also some of the questions that the young leaders have posed already. One is about, it's such a globalized world, how come education system right now is not providing us with all the access to different facets of this world? Secondly, about technology and also the realities of education. And thirdly, about we have one inspiring young leader on the stage who is trying to make a difference in political life, which is very difficult these days. Now, he talked about naivete, but I'm sure when he votes, he wouldn't think about that way. So how would you, comment on some of these important points already being mentioned? Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm glad I have a half hour to answer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with the politics, because I just started an organization that focuses on using education from a political perspective. And what I would say is I think there's a large group of people, both who have good educations and who don't, but would like one, who find that education is more and more critical. And I think as you see in democratic countries, the opportunity to build voter constituencies around education, you'll see bigger changes in education. In terms of technology, so I don't know how many people here know Kai-Ming Chang, but I'll channel him for a minute. He lives in Hong Kong, and I think he would say, learning is a human instinct. Education is a system. And so over the last 30 years, we've really learned tremendous amounts about how people learn. We've probably learned more in the last 30 years than the previous 100 or 200 years. And we don't really have not yet put that into action, because I think we see a system that's based on accountability and not on improvement.
Can we be specific? What exactly did we learn over the past few decades that you think can be tapped into the educational system, the kind of education you just talked about?
So to name 3 or 4 very specific things, the low-hanging fruit, for instance, is early childhood education, and alleviating the issues of poverty and violence. I mean, I would start by saying eliminating poverty, violence, making people feel supported is probably number 1. Number 2 is early childhood. Using the US context, I would say summer learning loss for poor kids. And then I would say the importance of having exercise for the brain. And then if we wanted to focus on reading, number one is, and this is for alphabet-oriented languages, the importance of phonics and general knowledge, because the research would show that if you look at kids who have good coding skills but poor general knowledge, when you look at how they perform in high school, the kids with general knowledge do better than the kids who had good coding skills.
Okay.
So since you mentioned a bit the political perspective, once I listened to the discussions over the day and also in the previous panel, I was thinking a bit about, the questions that were asked in terms of what is the purpose of education and what is the role that each of the different sectors plays in this. And I think there's apparently a lot of interest to interconnect and collaborate across the sectors, public sector and private sector, which is good, but I think we should also understand that there are different primary purposes for these two sectors when educating. So when I think about the public sector's responsibility in education, I think about how to, let's say, educate to have good and, values-driven citizens. Whereas when I think from the business side, it's probably more about the question of how do I get an asset, a human capital that works maybe in a very creative and adaptive way, but it's a different kind of angle to it. And therefore, I think if we also believe that one value of education is critical thought and challenging our own beliefs, I think one of the key questions for me, a bit also to you on the panel, is how can we, if our systems already have an idea of what a good citizen is, educate critical thought. And to quote a comedian, Tim Minchin, he says, we should take our convictions and ideas and out on the porch and hit them with a cricket bat and see what remains. So this is, I think, a bit my question of how can we maybe via exchange of ideas and people get to a good citizen that is critical.
But I don't think you responded to earlier Danny's comments about whether we really tapped into science discoveries in order to benefit and enrich the education right now. Any thoughts about that? If you don't, I move on to the next one. Because you also need to respond to the other people, right? You cannot just ask all the questions all the time. And this is a politician speaking, by the way. I'm kidding.
I just wanted to say I apparently already learned how to be a politician in 3 months. Yeah, I think, the question is connected to what I said, because at the moment, where is education policy being drafted? It's not on the EU level in my case, for example. So it is on the federal, on the lower levels, and the question there is definitely how can legislators learn better from the research that is being done to implement that into the system. But it's a very slow system because it's also very safeguarded against influence, I think.
Danny, I'll let you to further develop your thoughts a little bit, and before we move on to later.
Well, the important thing in education is sort of what happens in the home and in the classroom. And I think people have the wrong way of looking at political systems in education. And what I mean by that is when I think of the US context, I think that people should think of the federal government at the bottom, and then you have the state level, and then you have the local level and the schools. And that's how you need to think about it, because in the end, it's all about changing what people do who deal with students. And you can't do that. I think in the US we proved you can't do it top down. You have to build the conditions. And what I'm impressed with when I go to Singapore or Shanghai is you see that the idea is teacher improvement, not holding them accountable, making them as effective as possible. And unless you have that type of structure, you won't get people to adapt change. The line anyway in the U.S. is when how does it go? When you have basically ideas, when you have fear, when in stress, you regress. And so it has to be a positive moving system.
Mm-hmm. Eric, do you have stress enough to change?
I don't have stress. And in fact, My reaction to the last panel was a little bit different. I was not worried at all about any of the young leaders. They're going to be the winners, and they're going to adapt. In fact, I thought that the discussion was a little bit misplaced because we're here worried about the pace of artificial intelligence and robots and so forth. Has virtually no effect on the future lives of the young leaders that are up here. What it does have an effect on is the people who don't go to university in the lower levels of education that have been ignored in part in this discussion. Dan brought it up a bit, but the place where the rapid change, which we've seen in past eras, maybe is faster now, but the rapid change really strikes those who don't have the basic cognitive skills to adapt to the future. The real value that comes to education comes from adaptability. It's not that somebody with a PhD can assemble a car faster. It's that they're able to adapt to different circumstances, and that's what we're facing.
How to create the adaptability?
And that's the basic point, is that that's not in general done at the university level. That's done earlier when people get the basic cognitive skills that will propel them into various university fields. But there, we're talking about all kinds of activities like more vocational education for at the end of secondary schooling in developing countries, which I think is a very dangerous activity, because developing countries, if they develop, means that things are going to change rapidly. And if they don't have the basic skills, are not going to be prepared with very specific skills.
Okay. Since we're talking about the developing country, Jerry, though, coming from China, that's the largest developing country in the world. Of course, Jerry is coming more from the metropolitan side of China because he's working on shall we say, very high quality education. But you want to respond to that question Eric raised, and also talk generally, not just in China, but also, the North-South divide, or even the wealth divide within one economy when it comes to resources of education. U.S. included, I guess, in this regard also.
Sure. China is a very big country. It's very diversified. So you have the coastal cities very well developed, and also on the west side, less so. Many of the entrepreneurs and the business leaders in China have devoted a lot of resources trying to help those disadvantaged kids in the rural area. But of course, but at the end of the day,
earlier, of course, we heard from Jack.
Yeah. But one thing Jack talked about earlier, which I agree that if you talk about the role of university versus the industry or business, I don't think, personally, I don't think the university are prepared necessarily for the student for a specific job. That's not what we want. Now, as a running a business in order to hire people, I think it's very important to hire people with three basic things. The first one, I think, is to really have the good value. Okay, so what's right and what's wrong, what's ethical, what's legal, what's when to do the right thing. Okay. And that one, ironically, you don't have to learn necessarily from any university. And two, it's very important, regardless where you work with, for business or government, you have to learn how to, or at least to work with other people, okay? And again, you don't have to learn how to work with other people necessarily at any university. And the third, we talk about when we hire people, it's almost impossible to find fresh graduates exactly fit into what we need as a business. We always train them, but very importantly, we want to hire people or students with very good ability to learn. Okay, it doesn't matter what you learn, but you're able to learn. So, so when you come to the business, we can always train you as we need it. It doesn't matter if it's consulting or investment banks or auditing, whatever it is, legal. So you always, any companies we have, in the world, you know they have training programs for employees. So that's, if you have the ability to learn, then you can get there, okay? So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily the university role or job to do that, but you have to, you do have exams, so you do have dissertation, at least you have to pass all the exams and finish your dissertation, so you have to, you get trained to learn new things. I think that's very important. In terms of technology, of course, it have enable us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do in the past. I know a lot in China that we use online technology to help the poor kids in the rural area to get access to the best teachers in the big cities. Even though we would love to, as we discussed in the morning, to send the best teachers to remote area villages. Honestly, it's not impossible, but it's very, very hard to do. Even though we love it, but humans are humans. So, but what you could do is, you have the best teacher, for example, in Beijing, but with the technology, we can actually have a classroom in a rural area and help them and to be their teachers.
Which I think they're doing right now.
Yeah, which they are doing right now. I think that's going to change how education can be done, and in a big country like China and in other parts of the world as well.
Okay, we have, besides this young leader on my side, we have two other young leaders. They're all eager to speak up on this matter. Demi, go ahead.
Yeah, something that I want to bring up, and I want to be delicate about this, is something that I think is kind of the elephant in the room is how do we address ego in these challenging times? We are all leaders in some sense, but how are we truly able to cooperate if we are not able to listen to each other? So I'd say that each individual on this stage is an expert in their right mind and has a lot to bring to the table. But when we use loaded words like developing versus developed country, I think we start to sprinkle our own ego into the policies we want to create as if we know better than others. And so from an American standpoint, I would say in regards to climate change, we have a lot to learn. We don't necessarily need to be dictating policy as much as we need to learn from other countries on how to address our insatiable appetite for carbon and consumption. I think we have we need to show how to be leaders, not demand that other countries and individuals do it first. So I think what I'm curious of from the more seasoned leaders on the stage is what practices can we employ now that these, I guess, young leaders like myself can embody for the next generation. We see the need, we see the demand, but I'm not seeing I don't know how to mirror it. I'm not seeing it in actuality.
Did I hear a silence?
Well,
Or did I hear some answer coming up?
I'll
Eric.
respond in one sense. One of the big problems of education policy when we talk about it is that it takes time. There's just no way to get around the fact that it's a long-range, long-term plan, and that the immediate answers are often not very sustainable over the long run. It's that we have to build for what it looks like 20 years from now. So this morning we started discussing the Sustainable Development Goals. That's not something that we're actually going to solve by 2030 when the UN said we would. We're not going to eliminate poverty and solve all of the health problems of the world by 2030. But the education that we put in place today is going to dictate whether we have the economic growth that will in fact be able to sustain and pay for the other 15 elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that there are things that I would like to do immediately, but they aren't the long run goals of education.
Demi, you want to respond to that? Are you satisfied with the answer?
I'm satisfied. I think in terms of thinking more specifically about ego, I think you have to get your your thrill out of your objective. And the only way you can really do that is, as Eric said, have a long view. Make sure you have good statistics, but really look for who's doing it best so that you can apply it locally. And like I said, I think ultimately you have to decide what's your goal and know that you'll have to be very open if you want to get there.
We have a lot of philosophers on the stage, I feel, in a way. But anyway, Jesse, you're going to go ahead. And
Yes, I think the most interesting point from this panel is that I heard some difference on the opinions about the necessity of universities make students be prepared for career. With the panel before, I saw the difference. It's very interesting, but I'm also kind of nervous because I was the one who brought up this topic on the last panel. But I think what I mean is that I need to talk about the China case because Mr. He talked about China is very different between the provinces and different regions of China. Because we saw the PISA result of last year. China was so top ranking, but the targeting city is Beijing, Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang. So the two cities, Beijing and Shanghai, they are definitely the richest city in China. And then Jiangsu and Zhejiang are the two richest provinces in China. Alibaba is from Hangzhou, which is a city of Zhejiang. And I think the result is interesting that we only see the education situation for these four cities, for these four regions. I think we need to think more about the unprivileged areas in China. We have Gansu, we have Guizhou, we have Ningxia, we have these north and west regions in China. The situations are totally different. I think we couldn't stay in the ivory of that result. And Chinese educationers cannot be proud of that PISA result because we have a lot to work on. And I think a probably viable solution for that situation is that we need to provide more professional education, more vocational education for these unprivileged regions to make the people there have the skill or have the ability to make their own life. And I think that's what I mean. It's not only targeting to elite education, but to all of the citizen education. I think education is all about empowering and enabling everyone to be success in their own life. The first step is they need to feed themselves. They need to feed their family. And I remember we also talk about India case, talk about global South cases. I think that's the meaning of vocational education I mentioned on the last panel.
I think our conversation really for the second panel has been so much in a very inspiring way on the disparities that are going on in the world in terms of resources for education and the ways of education, not just among countries, but also within countries, but among different localities and within countries among different social groups as well. So I want you, Fred, if you could also comment about that, if you can, and some of the solutions, because earlier you provide one solution, say, oh, Jack Ma and I, we entrepreneurs trying to provide some kinds of education to the disadvantaged, economically at least, areas of China, which is a developing country. But I just want to know, what is the ultimate solution you see in the systematic building of our system now, not just in China, but also in other economies to address the divide of resources? Is that the right question, Danny? Is this the right question, Jesse? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, that's a tough one. Because if you talk about, there are two things I think we're talking about. One is about education. Specifically, we talk about sending the top level teachers back to the most remote place. I think that's idea, but it's very hard to do. But what we could do is we can, actually that's one of the things our company, Bright Scholar Education, is doing. Is, we send our teachers, top teachers, to those rural areas to train their teachers. Okay, so they are already there. Okay, instead of moving our teachers from so-called tier 1 cities, to a place they don't even know how to make a living. That's impossible. But we can send them there or have their teachers come to our company, so we train them. So they go back to where they come from, so they can continue to teach the kids there. That's one thing we could do in terms of education. But the thing is, even those kids get educated well, they move on, they go to university in big cities, they stay in big cities, so they're not going back. So the economy there is not really changing that much. That is not just purely educational problem. That's actually takes policies and work with the government and the society to help them to reduce their poverty. A lot of times it's not about, at least the way we do it, it's not giving them the money, because if you give them the money, they're going to use it up at some point and go back to what it was. So typically we send a team. Actually, our sister company do is to send a team there. It's almost like a management consulting team. Go to a village and help them figure out what trees they need to plant, what businesses they can do, and then help them to actually establish whatever the industry or business they could have, tailoring to the specific situation they have. Then they are able to, for example, there are rural area in Gansu province, which is far northwest of China, where they can raise hogs. Okay, hogs are very expensive, or pigs, in China, that you can sell those pigs to the big cities so they can make a decent living there. So once our team leave that village, they are left with a sustainable business so they can make a better living. Otherwise, we go back and forth, it's not going to fundamentally change their lives.
I think what you talk about can also be some, if there's an ancient saying, China's ancient saying for everything, we have another saying for this, which is, you don't want to just to give a fish. You want to teach people how to fish. That will be the legacy with them for long generations to come. Now, Damien.
So I think I learned a lot actually by what you all just said. Also, again, from the legislative perspective, I think what you said about the divide on, developed countries versus developing countries, what we always try to see within Europe is to say there's structurally weak areas, and they are in every country. Even my supposedly rich country, Germany, has structurally weak areas, not only in the east of Germany, the former communist areas, but also actually in the west. And so I think to learn from the best practices that you are also developing in terms of, how do we actually live with the fact that people, even if they get the good education, then just stay away and don't return to their original home areas. So I think that's a challenge that we will face in very small regions, and you obviously much more on a much bigger scale. So I think that's definitely something that I'll take with me. And I think from a legislative perspective, what I tried to say earlier is that there is this purpose of creating critical thought. But I do agree that the second purpose has to be, how do we create equal starting chances for people no matter where they're born? And this is, I think, a big question mark for me. And so to take these best practices from you is very interesting. So if you have more ideas on, somehow empowering more people who are disadvantaged in the current situation, I think it would be very interesting for me.
Yeah, please.
So it's a worldwide problem, as we saw at the very beginning today, of the gaps in socioeconomic status and income of families. And it's a problem that few countries have actually solved. Some of it have done it better than others. The simple takeaway that I have from studying schools for a long time is that it's the quality of the teachers that matter. So you can perhaps send better quality teachers, which is a big problem with the geographic distribution there. Not as big a problem in Germany, but it's still a problem. Or you can try to upgrade the whole quality of the whole teaching force.
Since you're coming from the U.S., why don't you use some examples coming from the U.S.?
Well, the U.S.
Successful ones or failed ones too, also.
The U.S. examples, the background is that In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared a war on poverty in the United States. And if you trace gaps in achievement by socioeconomic status from 1965 to today, you find nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, even though billions of dollars have been spent on low-income areas. The place where it's changed, which was brought up this morning, is Washington, D.C. And what happened in Washington, D.C. was that they decided they were going to take seriously the quality of teaching in the schools. They gave very large rewards to the best teachers, and they fired the worst teachers. Now, that's a hard thing to say in any education audience to use the word fired, but there were some teachers that were not up to standards, and there were others that you just desperately wanted to keep. And they made the hard choice, lots of political difficulties of doing that, and what they found is that that has improved the level of education and the disparities that exist within Washington, D.C. Dallas, Texas is doing exactly the same thing. The evidence there is that if you take the worst schools in the city of Dallas, which is a large metropolitan area with all kinds of problems, if you take the worst schools there and pay very good teachers to go into them, very good teachers will go in if they're paid to do it, and you can close the gaps of schools. So working on what we know works, which is quality teaching, is an answer, but it's usually the one we avoid because we say, oh my, it's so hard to change the teachers.
I remember dearly, Eric, the example you mentioned, especially in Washington, D.C. I was a correspondent there. We covered the big social debate it created as a result. It was really stirred up at that time. Susan, you can testify to that as well, since you were also serving the administration at that time. You know, we have a wonderful discussion on the stage, but different from the earlier panel, I do want to open up the floor a little bit, because sitting in the floor, actually, there are people much brighter than I am, and they have much better questions than what I asked earlier. So can we maybe 2 to 3 chances to our, our audience, and then we come back once again for a discussion here on the stage. Do we have a microphone? If we don't, you probably have to come up. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, the lady in green. So anyone have a question or a comment, please do that. Okay, this gentleman over here. Thank you so much. 谢谢. Yes, not a 5-minute speech, but rather a comment and a short question, if you can.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, great point. Who you are?
I'm Martin Henry. I represent the teachers' unions, and I'm interested in the comment on the quality of teaching, because what we've heard this morning, and I think quite correctly, is that teachers are in the best position to make a difference. How do you develop a system that's supportive when you're also advocating firing, accountability mechanisms, and approaches which are about spreading fear within the education system?
How could you support it to the teacher, but at the same time you say, fire them, if you don't like them? Okay, that's a great question. Let's collect the question and then we come back for the discussion. Eric, you probably handle that, okay? Any other questions? Any other? Do we see some hands in the audience? Just some brief comments and brief questions if you can. Any other did I see? So you agree with what's going on? This sounds like a classroom. Any questions? Okay, why don't we let Eric and the others to handle that. You want to go first?
No, I'd like to give it to Professor Tang.
Oh, Professor
from
Tan.
the National Institute of Education in Singapore.
Yeah, Professor Tan, brief comments, brief question. Okay, over there. Yes, Professor Tan, can you raise your hand so that our staff know? Yeah, thank you.
Actually, the solutions often are already there, but I think what is often lacking is the conversation between the stakeholders that are helping with the teacher professionalism from the perspective of the school, the teachers, the community, the government, you know. I think if you can have just better coherence and integration, you would already have solved quite a lot of problems.
Okay, let's have Susan also, because Eric raised that issue earlier. Susan, please.
And I'd also love to hear from Maria Helena because she has dealt with this issue in Brazil. I guess I would want to add to that question, how do we attract higher quality of teachers to the classroom? In the United States, for example, it is not an esteemed profession, and so we're getting the bottom of the class interested in becoming teachers. So my question is, how do we attract, as Singapore does, as Shanghai does, top-level people to go into teaching? So we don't have to worry about firing the worst. We just come back to, as we used to have in the United States, attract the best to go into education.
Attract the best. And we have a gentleman over there asking a question. Who you are and the question.
My name's Hardin Coleman. I'm a professor and dean emeritus of BU Wheelock College of Education at Boston University. And my question, I want to go back to the university question that we had before. And this issue of the university as producing knowledge and scholarship, and then also vocational training. Do you see, in both this panel and the previous panel, that one of the issues may be that a large number of schools, colleges, that no longer have a function and should turn over to more vocational function, while there are other universities that will maintain their role as liberal arts universities?
Thank you. And a brief comment over there. We have one lady over here, and that will be the last one. We'll bring all the questions back to the stage. Yes, please.
Well, Maria Helena from Brazil. First, I would like to approve and support the question of the man, that man. Yes, you. I had this question for the other panel. Second, the question of the man representative from the teacher unions, you. This is a question in the whole world. There is this question, how to improve teacher profession and how to improve teacher quality. This is quite different. And I think that one of the biggest problems is teacher colleges. Teacher colleges are not preparing teachers to face the challenges they have at school level. In general, teacher leaves teacher colleges, initial teacher training, without knowing. And on the other side, in training teacher, oh my God, continuous teacher training at school level, in general, are not facing the problems that all of you are mentioned. The problems of develop the basic concept, skills and competencies. Yes. So this is the problem, in my view. There is a big debate, but it's very far from school level and far from public schools in the whole world.
Okay. Final comments and question from there. We come back to the discussion on the stage.
Thank you. My name is Dorothy Gordon, and I normally work on technology and education, but I'm a development economist, and I've been fascinated that we've had all of this discussion. Nobody is talking about budgets and what it will cost.
They talk about budgets in different words earlier, yes.
Yes, but let's be serious about it. I come from Africa. We will have the most, half of the world's population under 20 in just a few years. What is it going to cost us to actually develop those people? The kind of world that you're talking about, the technology facilitated, the technology-enabled world.
Wow, we got a lot of them, a lot of questions. See, they have much better talents than I am. Can we maybe have the young leaders, can we do that, to respond to all of these questions, but select the one that you feel really passionate about?
So I like that you mentioned cost, and you said, what is it going to cost us to do it? I think it's too expensive not to do it. And so the easy answer right now is we need to pay teachers more. We need to financially give incentives to them, because I'm from a place in San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, where I left a very profitable career in financial technology because I had an intrinsic calling to education. I was advised by friends and mentors to not get my graduate degree because there would be very low economic opportunities for me, and still I did it. And now, even today, as an educator at UC Berkeley, I am barely making ends meet in some ways and still paying a very high cost of graduate education. So not only am I paying debt on receiving a graduate education, but I'm also advising students and telling them, yeah, I don't see how being an educator is going to be profitable. And I always tell the students that I advise, take care of yourself first so that you can empower others. So I think if we really want to improve the quality of teachers, we need to glamorize them. We need to provide them with economic incentives. I think it's hilarious that we've got investment bankers making six-figure salaries when I don't see the utility they provide in the same way as educators and doctors. And so we have to change the way we're investing.
But the question really is how, right? We all know we need to change it. We talk about it for decades, but the question really is how.
Give us more money.
Okay, all right.
All right, I would love to take that question because
You used to be an investment banker.
I used to be a investment banker. I worked for Morgan Stanley before I got into education. Okay, I really love that question because it's very easy to say we want to do this and do that, but exactly like this lady said here, where's the money coming from? Okay, we would always love to do things that we have hard for, but a lot of times if you don't make a living, it doesn't work. Okay, that's it. So I run a for-profit education company, therefore, and we are also NYSE listed, so I have my shareholders. Therefore, I always have to think about budget. Okay, of course, we want to give our teachers best salary and best benefit and all of that. But unfortunately, like it or not, it all costs money. Okay, so therefore, you have to find a way. It's just like everything else, any other industry, you have to position your product or service in a way that it can be self-sustainable. Okay, if you run a school, which I personally experienced before I became the CEO of the company, we have been losing money for 20 years. You know, if you continue to lose money, at one day you're gonna have to shut it down. Okay, if you shut the school down, forget about what you want. Okay, it's gonna end right there. Okay, so so just like every other industry, you have to figure out, develop a product or service that people would be willing and happy to pay for. Of course, at the same time, we also have charity schools that are great. It's 100% free for kids with limited resources. But you can't say, well, just like any government want to say, they're probably going to say publicly as well, I want the best talents go to the education industry, want to pay them well. But where is the money coming from? All right. So, of course, for example, like China, have been increasing its budget in education year after year, which I have seen. Okay, we have seen that. So the quality of education in China have improved dramatically. And I was actually doing research on this about, I was born in the 70s. Back then, people are worried about, actually during the Cultural Revolution when I was born, people worried about what's going to happen in China, and we saw the things going on. I never worried about another cultural revolution in China. Why? Because back then, there were 6 million soldiers in China, only 2 million intellectuals, meaning people with college degrees. Now we only have 2 million soldiers in China, but we have 200 million people with college degree. So you have different perspective. So of course, that's changed a lot. Another thing I want to answer is really the union question. Luckily, I don't have a union. I have more than 5,000 teachers, but I don't have a union. But I do not agree that we cannot, I don't know, this word was used, firing teachers, okay? Just like in any other profession, there are better performers and there are relatively kind of bottom performers, okay? Our company, we fire a teacher every year, if you like to use the word firing, because there are people, for example, they are, in our view, it's not up standard of teachers. For example, they drink and drive and get into an accident. That's breaking the law, okay? That's not a good example for students. So if you do that, we fire you on the spot, okay? And there, of course, I can raise a lot of other issues that we think you're not a very good example for your students. And we know, parents know, I mean, it's not about your score. It's about, do you have effort? See, some of the teachers we do genuinely can see that do care about the students. They see the student eye to eye and trying to do the best to help students. Even if their score is not that great, that's not a cause for firing. But there are teachers do not necessarily care that way. We see that again and again, we're going to have to fire them. So we get a better ones.
To honor those with the greatest qualities and to make sure those with not up to standard qualities will not be in the team will be one of the best ways to honor those who are coming with the real qualities. Eric, you want to also say something? I'm not saying what you do in your company is exactly right or wrong, because I'm not here, Jerry, to judge about your company, but just generally speaking. Eric, please go ahead.
Let me respond to Mr. Henry and in the following follow-up questions on this. First, I don't think you necessarily have to have a system that is only based on fear of firing. It's many jobs, at least in the United States, 80% of the jobs people are subject to being fired. They aren't fired regularly because that's not the way you'd run a business. The very poorest performers that aren't competing are. I think that in the United States, and here's where we start to get into the divergence of different countries and their systems. In the United States, we way underpay our teachers, and that we should, in fact, be paying our teachers quite a bit more. My own estimates are we underpay our teachers by over 20%. But that doesn't mean that you should pay everybody 20% more, because some are worth more than that difference, and some are worth less. And that if you increase the overall salaries, we would be much better off. We can't do it, Maria Helena, through teachers' colleges as we know it now, because we're not really sure what makes for a good teacher and who's going to do very well in the classroom till we see what people do in the classroom and how they take to their task. And so I don't think that solving the teacher college question is one that's going to solve our teacher problem for some time, because we just don't know the answers there. I think that we have to make our best guesses, pay the teachers a good salary, give them better respect out of the good salary, but treat them like professionals. And what's a professional? A professional to me is somebody who is willing to be held accountable for performance. And so I would like to treat all teachers as professionals and have them held accountable for performance.
Yeah. Danny?
In addition, I would just like to mention that, the question was brought up of how do we pay them. I would like to consider education a public good. There shouldn't be a goal of how do we make education profitable, because that's not the goal of education. It's to empower individuals to contribute to the economy, to increase human capital. So if we continuously add these monetary factors to the goals of education, I think we're going in the wrong direction. And I think there's many countries whose governments prioritize putting money into public education. And unfortunately, Professor Hanishek mentioned this before, but the United States, there's been a divestment in public education for the past 30 years, and now the PISA results are starting to show that. And in addition, you're seeing negative health outcomes. And I'm not going to say that there's a direct correlation, but if we are not having governments invest in education and seeing it as a public good and a human right, then I don't think we're going to improve. Let businesses make money and let educations improve individuals.
Jesse?
Yeah, I'll not discuss Mr. Henry's question from that top-down degree, but as a student, I'm really interested in teachers' questions, because my only occupation for the past 20 years is student. And as a student, I really want my teacher to have some pressure. That's not revenge. It's just, it's just teachers are doing assessments, evaluations for us, but we want more evaluation for our teachers. Actually, when I was in Cornell, there's a website I will use every time before I enroll the classes. It's called Rate My Professors. And the information, the comments on that website is so accurate. And it seems like the administration of my school just never knows about this website. Because some of the comments is just so accurate. And we want probably...
Now you tempted all of us to go on that website and check it out.
We just want a clear and open channel from the students to report what they think to the school. It's not necessarily be by bad comments, probably good comments on teachers. And I understand there are complicated cases for different universities because some of the professors may have much better academic achievement, research achievement than their performance in classroom. But I think universities, colleges need to give more value on how the teacher perform on just simply teaching. Because universities are not only institutions for research, they're also school. I think that's my opinion from a pure student. And for another question about the separation of vocational schools and elite or liberal education schools, I would like to speak about China case again, because China does have a separation on the system. We have, in China, we call 职高, sort of like professional high school or professional or 大专, sort of like professional universities, only teaching about vocational skills. It's not part-time school, it's a full job school, full-time school, probably teaching about cooking, about haircutting, about serving as other roles in the industries. I think China has a lot equality problems in education, but they are having a good shape on building up a system. And also for elite education or liberal education in China, we also have a system called 高考. It's the college entrance examination, nationwide, ensures the fairness of high school students entering college. We don't care about extracurricular. We don't care about who you can get recommendations letter from. We don't care about do you know the trustee board of universities or not. We just care about how you perform on this academic test. Are you hardworking enough to prove you are able to enter a good universities?
I see. Jesse, I'm sure you're not here to preach to anyone about the so-called model. Because every country has their own circumstances in a way to figure out what's the best for them. But certainly we can learn from each other's examples and know this context in which those things are being done.
Just sharing the examples of China.
Yes, exactly. So I think that will be interesting. But Daniel, also from your side, and then we come to Damien, and we'll wrap it up.
So like Jesse, I went to Cornell. And when you look at the Ivy League school or the private university model, right, then you'll understand why teaching is more or less important, why some people get in by recommendation and some don't. So I think it's always important to look at the model. Going back to the discussion of teachers, I'll always remember being in Finland and one of the ministry officials who said to me, well, I know in the US why you can't get math teachers. And I said, oh, and why is that? And he said, because if you can do numbers, you know you can't afford to be a teacher. And so I think when simple math, follow the numbers, or the simple math will tell you the story, and that's true whether it's the universities or it's true on having a teaching force that teaches at a high quality level.
Okay, Damien?
So there have been many issues touched upon. My mother is a teacher, so I can understand that the whole package of reputation and remuneration has to work in a way that actually increases the profession. And I won't add on that, even though I feel emotionally about it. But since there was a mentioning on the vocational training, and you also explained a bit like the Chinese system, I think one element that is really interesting for me is that we often seem to project to our students that there's one way. And there's basically one grade system you can be measured by, and it's very one-dimensional. And in Germany, we see that people who would be amazing nurses or could actually earn a lot of money by being a woodworker or stone worker now are being pulled into the university system because it's supposedly cooler. And then their monetary expectations are actually going down when they go there, because if they would just stay in the vocational system, which is actually, I think, a bit of a issue of debate between the OECD and Germany from time to time, there is, I think, very often a much more suiting profession to the multidimensional interest, like the interest of that specific child or student. And so I think the question is, how can we maybe build a system that allows you in lifelong learning also to change that path again once you have decided what, you decide early on, maybe I want to go in that kind of way, and then maybe at some point you say, actually an academic kind of career could also be something for me. So I think it's a very valid question of how do we, spread the different paths in life to the very different individual characters we have in our society.
Okay, and Eric, I promise you with a one response, but one response only.
One quick response on cost. This also differs across countries. In Africa, on average, pays much too little for its schools. But if you saw the charts this morning that Andreas put up, he showed very large differences in the outcomes of students dependent upon the amount of money spent. Some countries spent a lot and got a lot. Some countries spent a lot and got little. So in the United States, a very simple way to pay these higher teacher salaries that I would like to pay would be a very slight increase in this student-teacher ratio, which would, in fact, pay for all of the increases to teachers that we have not been doing in the United States.
All right. Okay, we're running out of time. Michael is giving me the sign. We're about to run out of time. So if I could, every one of you, one takeaway from the other speakers you listened to today, what would that be? Daniel.
Someone else go first. I think my big takeaway is that when you're in the... Sorry. I guess, my big takeaway is really that I'm really excited about the next generation.
My takeaway is when do we start working? When do we start making this happen?
Okay, that's a great question. And Eric?
My takeaway is that there are wide differences across countries, but that everybody should be focused on what students are learning and the outcomes.
Jesse?
Yeah, my takeaway is also about the differences, and we can always learn from something from the differences, and it's pretty valuable for me.
Please.
My takeaway is really the lifetime learning is always learning.
Damien, last but not least.
My takeaway is the importance of the reputation of teachers.
My takeaway is we have so many bright minds and talented people sitting in this room. We will, Danny, make it happen, right? If you think it's right, then give us a warm round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen on the stage. Thank you so much. And our audience, thank you. 谢谢大家. Thank you.